Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I have a returning guest. Hey, Michelle, welcome. Thanks for coming back with me.
Hey, oh my gosh, I'm so thrilled. I just love talking to you, and I know we're going to get into so much goodness here.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so let's remind everyone who you are. You're a relationship coach. You also work with couples. And so tell us real quick about who you are and what you do, just for those who didn't hear our first session, our episode together.
Hey, yeah, so my name is Michelle Purta, and I'm a married mom of three, and I'm a marriage coach, and I work with parents to help them reconnect with their relationship as a couple after they have kids. It's so easy to disconnect and for the communication flare-ups to happen even more often with the added stress of having more responsibility. It's not even just like a little bit more responsibility, it's like exponentially a lot more, right? And so I love to help couples learn how to communicate properly so that they can get through all the conflicts that they encounter throughout their relationship, throughout parenting, and all of those things, and save that energy for more fun things like going on dates and enjoying each other and flirting and actually enjoying their marriage rather than feeling like, oh, it's you,
Yes,
you know?
ma'am.
So
Yep.
I want you to set a good, healthy example for your kids and enjoy the process of being married because at the end of it, the kids are going to move out. And then what, right? You can be left with a stranger or alone or, what is unhappy? What is it? So I want to help you prevent that and have the skills to navigate marriage through the different phases that we encounter.
Yes, I love it. In our first episode, I'll actually link in the show notes to what number episode that was, but we had a great conversation about just that, about how you and I both really focus on helping married couples nurture the communication and the time and really working on like, what are they bringing to the equation that could get in the way of having healthy communication and relationships. So today I'm so excited. So you and I basically we're going to have a conversation today that could span 2 episodes. So we're going to see how far we get into it. We might be able to cover it in one. If not, we already have plans to record a second one. So the topic that we're doing, I actually was talking to a therapy client probably 2 months ago, and we were having a discussion about boundaries and boundaries in relationship. And as we were talking, the client I was talking to is really trying to grasp what does a boundary really look like in a relationship, because unfortunately boundaries is the topic of boundaries is something that's not understood by everyone. It is a negative for most people. Like, hearing the word boundary sounds like a negative thing and it implies selfishness or things like that, and you and I are going to get into the definitions. But we were talking about how healthy and important boundaries are. And we were also talking about how a boundary can sound a lot like an ultimatum. And so I was like, oh my gosh, okay, there is a huge difference between a boundary and an ultimatum. But for a lot of people, they don't see a difference. So that's our topic. Is there a difference between a boundary and an ultimatum? So, Michelle, what is a boundary, girl? Tell me. Let's define
Well,
it.
let's do what everyone does, right? Let's go to Google and actually figure
Yes,
out what
ma'am.
they say because I'm very curious. So Google says a line that marks the limits of an area. Okay, so that's one. I feel like that's a little physical.
Yeah.
A limit of a subject or sphere of activity. Okay, so that's very vague.
Hmm.
Okay, it's more physically driven, which is probably why a lot of people don't understand what the hell boundary is.
Yes.
But to me, the biggest confusion that people have around boundaries is that they think that if they're uncomfortable, that they get to tell people what to do to make sure that they're comfortable.
Mhm.
Do you get the same thing from other people?
Yep. Hold on. Ooh, I lost you. Let me come back. I was Googling. Okay, ask your question again.
So I feel like the biggest thing that people get confused about when it comes to boundaries is like, if they feel uncomfortable, then
Yeah.
that gives them the right to tell the other person what to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, okay, so if we even break it down more, a boundary is basically me saying this, kind of like you were saying, that line. This is my line. And
Mm-hmm.
beyond this, I'm not comfortable. I don't want to do that. I don't like that. So I'm putting up a kind of a block to, I'm not going to pass this line. So yeah, so I think what people kind of what you're saying is people push through that.
Mhm.
If they want something, then they want what they want. It doesn't matter what the other person's boundary is. So when we talk about emotional boundaries, because there's the physical boundary, there's
Mhm.
whatever. So if an emotional boundary basically is I'm not comfortable with something and I need to not be involved in that. So why let's talk about it in terms of a relationship. Let's just give some examples. What are boundaries in relationships? What would be something we could, like in a marriage, for example?
Yeah, so a common boundary is when there's a couple where one partner processes things differently, right? One is so ready to like get into the ring and start battling it out, and the other person's like, I need some time to think about this and process and come back to you. And normally, when there's a dynamic like this, and the couple hasn't learned how to regulate themselves, how to process properly, and come back and have the conversation in a calm manner so that it's productive, the person who is more anxious, I'll say it, the person who's more anxious in wanting to talk it through because it makes them more uncomfortable to not talk about it right then and there than it is to like take a break and whatnot, they're going to keep pushing even
Yep.
though their partner is saying, can we talk about this later? I can't handle it. Or maybe they're not even verbally sharing that they're overwhelmed. They're just shutting down or they're walking away because that's their coping mechanism. And they haven't learned other tools to use to really, you know, stand firm with their boundary. And so them doing that, that's an emotional boundary that you're crossing because you're literally saying, like, I don't care how you feel, how I feel feels more important to me in this situation, and we need to talk it through.
Yep. Absolutely. And that's such a great example because I think that that goes back to what we were saying earlier about how we focus on helping people with communication because people think when they say like we have problems with communication, I think they think of the words. We don't talk well, we don't
Mm-hmm.
communicate, like we don't know how to have conversations, but one of the basics of communication is the time and the place and
Yes.
the situation. And so if I need to take a break from this conversation and you don't want to take a break, that is a huge part of like bad communication. Your needs to overcome this discomfort and end your personal discomfort of like, oh my God, I need to fix this, your anxiety does not trump my need to take a break. But my need to take a break also cannot trump your need to talk about it. So in a relationship, we frequently have to compromise. But
Mm-hmm.
to even get to a point of compromise, we have to be able to identify what's my boundary? I don't want to do this. I don't want to talk in a way because then what you're going to get from me is bad communication. I might yell at you. I might cuss at you. I might just start crying. And then if you keep pushing at me and I can't talk, then you're just going to get me completely disengaged. And that might help make you feel like rejected. So
Mm-hmm.
coming up with what is my line? What do we do about the fact that our lines look different? So
Yeah.
how do you see it play out like in your or actually you had a thought. I'm sorry, interrupted you.
Yeah. So for me, a boundary is something that helps you actually strengthen and be in relationship with someone.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like majority of people feel like a boundary is teaching people how to treat you, and if you don't do it then we cannot be in a relationship, or other people who view the boundary who are not used to boundaries being set and upheld are like, oh, you're just being controlling. And it can be controlling if they're not properly set,
Yeah.
right? There's a difference between setting an actual boundary and being controlling. When you're setting a boundary, what that is actually doing is it's saying, okay, this is my line. If that line gets crossed, I'm going to do this.
Yep.
But a lot of other people think that, hey, this is my line. And if you cross it, I'm going to make you do this. It's
Yeah.
external facing, but boundaries are actually all about you. So
Yeah.
in this situation, if I were the partner, which I'm not, who needs time to process, then if my partner were to come up to me and be like, I need to talk right now, it's like, okay, I cannot talk right now. I need time. to calm down and think through this and figure out what my own opinions and thoughts and feelings are about this and what I want, so that I can talk to you calmly and not say anything I regret. So if you continue talking to me, I'm going to have to leave the room. I'm going to have to remove myself so that I can give myself this space. Not, I'm going to tell you to shut up, or I'm going to leave. Like it's not a threat.
Yeah.
It's more about what you're going to do for yourself, with yourself.
Yep. Yeah. And I think with that example, the main thing that comes to my mind is it's really hard to just implement this if you haven't communicated ahead of time that this is something, right? So if our pattern is to, you follow me, like yelling at me, and my pattern is to shut down until I turn around, blow up at you, then if I all of a sudden turn around and say, hey, I don't feel like I can talk about this right now, I need a minute, you're going to be like, what? Like, it's not going to go very well, because it's going to be very shocking to your system. And again, you won't be able to regulate. And so if we, and the goal of this is to say, all right, couple, please sit down, watch this together and say, okay, how do we want to do this differently? So when we get in an argument, our tendency is for me to follow you and want to resolve it, and for you to shut down. So how about you tell me, like, what would you like me to know? How do you want to communicate to me? Like, do we need a code word? Do we need a nonverbal sign? You scratch your nose or something. Like, how do you communicate to me that you're done? Because if I don't know you're done, I'm going to keep going, because I'm not paying attention to what you need. I'm so fixated on my emotions. And then vice versa. If you need me to stop, and you, or whatever, the opposite of that, I don't even know my example now, the opposite of that, like figuring it out ahead of time so that when you're in the moment, you implement, and knowing that when you try to implement it, it's not going to work the first few times. Right. So don't be discouraged. Keep trying.
Yeah, I always say that conflict is kind of like doing a dance choreography, right? You've been doing this specific dance for a long, long time, right? And so you're going to be used to doing certain things. It's going to feel natural, second nature, right? This is just how you go. But when you realize that it's actually a pattern, patterns can change, and it just takes this like little tiny ounce of change for you to start carving a new path, to, do a new choreography. And so, yeah, it's going to take time. And the best thing is, if you're able to talk about it when there's nothing going on, right? Calm. There's no issue going on. There's no high stakes, no high emotions, right? What do they say? The higher the emotion, the lower the rationality, the lower the logic, the lower the reasoning. Okay, so if you notice that there's an issue, there's a pattern that's not very healthy, or you don't like it, talk about when there's absolutely nothing going on. Be like, hey, you know what I noticed? Right? It doesn't have to be something super serious. Just like, you know what I noticed? Every time we fight, like, you do this and then I do that, and then I don't like that and then I do this. So I kind of want to try something new here. What do you think? Should we try that? And how are we going to help each other stay accountable to this new change, and give yourself grace?
Yeah. I love it. And I think, what I hear a lot is, well, it's calm. I don't want to bring it back up because then we're going to get into it again. And I'm like, I hear you, but that is not, like, that's avoiding the problem. Like this, you're trying to avoid it completely, instead of saying, okay, it might be a little uncomfortable, but it's less uncomfortable doing it this way than waiting for another blow up to happen that just puts us in such a bad place as a couple, emotionally and then personally, all the things. But the other thing I was thinking about while you were saying that is kind of the idea that I need you to, okay, well, actually, this will take us into kind of more of our definition. I think when we create a boundary, we have to understand the goal of the boundary. Mm-hmm. If I'm putting a boundary in place, then I can't be doing it for you. I have to be doing it for me, because what I hear a lot, like, even take an example that's not marriage related. Let's say it's a friendship situation. Well, I told my friend that I didn't like it when he talked to me this way. And so I told him, like, that's it. If you talk to me like that from now on, I'm not going to come over. I'm not going to hang out with you. Okay, great. You communicated a boundary. But then you got mad at that friend because they continued talking to you that way. Well, I told them if I was going to hang out with them, they couldn't treat me like this and they're just not respecting my boundary. And I'm like, hold on, listen, you're telling this person your boundary and asking them to implement a change in their behavior because you want them to. That's not a boundary. A boundary is if you treat me like that again, I'm leaving. And then you are responsible. Your expectation is going to be that they're going to repeat that negative behavior because, like you said, it's like a choreography. It's a pattern, it's a repetitive behavior. So if they do the thing that you don't want them to do, don't be shocked. They've done it long enough to make you feel like you wanted to put a stop to it. You have to implement the boundary. And only when we make a change in ourselves and we truly stand by our boundary, that is when other people start to treat us differently.
It's the follow through. It's just like parenting,
Yes.
seriously. And, this is something that I'm learning too, because I definitely wasn't raised this way. It was very much like a lot of like empty threats and yelling and just, all the things. And now I'm trying to like be a different parent to my kids, and it's difficult, right? Like it sometimes means like, okay, well, you won't turn your tablet off. Okay, like normally I would be like, yeah, turn that off or you're gonna lose that. Da, da, da. It's like, no, I need to go up to them and be like, hey, do you need help turning it off? Looks like you're having a hard time. Do you need a minute to finish? What's going on? And if they just are not cooperating, then I tell them, okay, time to turn it off, and you take the thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, you cannot just say these things to people because maybe they think that you're messing around, or maybe they don't understand the seriousness behind it and they're just doing that. They're not doing it to offend you, right? Like
Yeah.
most people are not doing things to attack you personally, right? But we take things personally because we're human,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
so if we're going to set a boundary and communicate what we're comfortable with and what we need to have a healthy relationship with that other person, and they don't deliver because, hello, change takes time,
Mm-hmm.
then we need to be like, okay, like I was serious about that. And you
Mm-hmm.
actually follow through on what you said you were going to do and leave.
Mm-hmm.
Or don't invite them anywhere anymore. And they'll be like, oh, I wonder what happened. How come we don't hang out anymore? Well, the last time we hung out, this is what happened, and I really didn't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And you know what's funny as you say that? It's going along with our kind of definition of insanity. Like, I told you, I told you,
Mm-hmm.
I told you. Then what happens is we justify, like if I repeat myself and don't follow through, then I justify losing my shit, right?
Yep.
So if I tell you to put your tablet away, put your tablet away, put your tablet away, and you don't do it, then I'm like, well, I told him, and now I'm screaming and yelling at my kid, and it's my kid's fault that I'm screaming and yelling at them because I told them they didn't listen. That's not how that works. Your child is not responsible for the fact that you didn't follow through with your parenting strategies and that you have no ability to regulate your emotions.
Yep.
So, but adults, like, I don't know, I think human nature, we blame the other person because they didn't do what we wanted instead of us saying, if you're not going to do what I'm telling you to do, then I will A, remove myself, B, implement this parenting strategy, C, whatever. Like, I am responsible for my boundary, not you. And that is
Yeah.
like the crux of why boundaries are not understood.
Seriously. And the crazy thing is that like in previous generations, at least with my experience, right? If you are ahead of the game, I am so like happy for you, but not for me. Like this is like I am the first to be like working on my own awareness of my emotions and whatever for like my whole family line. But the crazy thing is that we are so focused on how they're doing it to piss us off when really they're not doing that at all. They're just enjoying themselves or distracted or whatever. And we make them responsible for our emotions, right?
Yes.
And that is the most disempowering thing that we can do as individuals. The more empowering thing to do is like, okay, I have already decided what my line is and what my next course of action is depending on what happens. I'm not waiting for someone to do what I need them to do in order for me to feel empowered, right?
Mhm.
Because that is that about control rather than the end result. Like you said earlier, we have to have the goal in mind. What is your goal? When we have the goal in mind and we've thought about it, we can act more intentionally rather than reactively, right? So if we're
Right.
like, okay, well, it's dinner time and that needs to go away so that they can join us. So, what is the best course of action to get them to the dinner table? Right? Not, oh, they're not listening to me. Let me dig my heels in and continue yelling and yelling and yelling and let my own emotions escalate. And then I lose my shit. And then I put it on that person that I couldn't regulate myself enough and I couldn't, I couldn't be more aware of me losing my shit before I lost my shit. It's like,
Yep.
no, that's not how this works. We're all responsible for our own emotions. No one else can make us feel a certain way. We might be triggered by what they did, but again, that's our own perception of
Right.
what's going
Yeah.
on.
And like you said, it's that assertion of power. And I think there's this
Mm-hmm.
misunderstanding that, and I think generationally, like you said, I think people perceive strength and power as aggression. If I get
Force.
loud, yeah, if I'm loud and
Mm-hmm.
I'm strong and I'm in your face, then you will take me seriously and you will respect me. I personally, just in my own perception, if I see someone lose control and behave like that, I actually just lose a ton of respect. I don't respect you more. I don't value your confidence and your power. I actually see you as unhinged and would more than likely separate myself from you immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you come to me and you say, I don't appreciate that, and I'm not going to be continuing to be a part of this relationship if you continue to treat me like that, I would be like, yeah, dang, I'm so sorry. Let's talk about that, right? And so what
Yes.
is the goal? Is the goal to assert your power over the other person and scare them into submission? And unfortunately, that's not just with children. Adults are trying to do this to
Yep.
each other, right?
Yep.
Or is the goal to be respected and valued and treated
Yep.
with dignity? Then I also have to give that to you because then people are shocked why they get yelled at back and why they're cussed at back. I'm like, well, I mean, like, you're not special. If you're going to yell at that person, then you don't get to be mad or shocked when they yell back at you. That's not a right that you have. And I mean, especially with parenting, because I think there's an expectation that children don't deserve the same value. I
Mm.
mean, there is a difference between being an authority and being like a power an assertive parent in that way, that
Yes.
authoritarian versus authoritative, right? And that
Yes.
I have a whole topic on that, but
Yes. And I've been loving watching your videos with your son. It's just like so awesome. And even my 7-year-old starts to listen. I could see his ears perk up and he walks up to my phone to watch. So keep doing those.
I love that. Thank
But
you.
there is a difference between asserting your power and being assertive, right? And I believe that if you get to that point where you do lose your shit and you become aggressive, that's a sign that you were passive for too long, right? And assertive is
Perfect.
that really healthy middle ground between passive and aggressive, right? So you are asserting what your needs are, what you are wanting out of the situation, where your line is. If you're passive, you're just kind of like, making excuses or waiting too long, not being aware of where your line is. And then you jump. It's almost like you surpass the assertiveness and you go straight to aggression and you blow up or you storm out or you do silent treatment, right? The goal is to get yourself closer from passive to assertive so that you can still feel heard and like feel good about how you're delivering the message, right? Because if you're getting angry, no one feels good about that. You have like pretty much blown up all the good vibes in the room,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't feel good for you to be passive either because you're creating resentment in you and allowing it to just marinate and it's just like it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting as you say that. Tell me what you think. This is a forming thought. It's not fully developed, but I almost see that the person that is blowing up is still like, if they're passive and then they blow up, I still categorize them as passive because you have not transitioned over to assertive. You've just lost your
Mm-hmm.
shit as a
Yeah.
passive person. But then you
Yes.
go right back to allowing it, allowing it, allowing it.
Yes.
So I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of feel like then it's like passive aggressive.
Yeah. There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if what you're doing isn't working, let's try something different here, right? Because, like, let's take the whole parenting example. Our kids don't feel more connected to us when we are controlling them, when they feel like they're being controlled. Like, how do you feel when someone's telling you what to do all the time and you feel like someone's trying to control you? You're probably not going to like that. I don't know many people who do, right? We are all individuals and we all have our own opinions about how things work and what we want to do and when we want to do it. And so the best way to feel connected and to receive cooperation from them is to be a good leader, right? Like, when my kids are yelling at me, I don't actually do anything until they walk over and talk to me. It's like, this is not how we communicate, right? And I have started to do that with them because I didn't grow up with that, right? Like, I had yelling all the time. So it's like, okay, they didn't hear me or they're not following through because they're really like entrenched in whatever the heck they're doing. I'm going to walk over there. Is it more burdensome and inconvenient? 1000%. But I do feel like with the more energy put into parenting, it does yield more rewarding results because there is a stronger bond, a stronger connection, especially when you realize when you set healthy boundaries and you follow through that it actually works.
Yep. 100%. I love that. And I think it goes back to, you know, creating new patterns, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
when you're having to break a habit or learn something new, it is really taxing and inconvenient at first. But then once you cross that point where it's just a new habit, you're like, how did I
Yes.
function before this? Right. And so, yeah, it might not always be easy, but it's easier than it was before because, like you said, there's a reward. And so with parenting, yeah, it's so hard because sometimes the easiest thing to do is just to be like, whatever, I don't care,
Mm-hmm.
just do it. But if you let it slide, then you're now going to be, you know, unintentionally creating another bad habit that when you have more energy, you're going to be so frustrated that now you're having to work harder than had you just sucked it up, gone and dealt with it, talked to your kid, took the iPad away or tablet or whatever. It's just, life is full of inconveniences, but I think sometimes we justify letting the personal relationship inconveniences just kind of like whatever. Whereas if it was at work, you would just get up and handle that inconvenience because you have a client that's paying you or a boss that's watching
Yes.
you. But I think with families and relationships, I don't know, we're lazy.
We do get, no, seriously, we do get lazy because, I mean, we understand, okay? Like, we get it. I want to be lazy all the time, right? But at the end of the day, if I don't like having to deal with something repetitively, that's on me.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? We can't blame the other person for not doing something different if we're not following through on our own boundary. It's
Right.
kind of just like, I don't know, what is that similar to? It's like saying, oh, like, I really like, I don't even know. I'm like having a
Okay,
brain
I
fart.
got
I
an
can't even think of
example.
an
It's
example.
yeah, like if I tell you like, hey Michelle, when we go out to dinner tonight, I don't want to eat dessert because I'm trying to be careful, right? So we go out to dinner and I like, oh, I want dessert. And you're like, oh, but you told me not to tell you not to eat dessert. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Like, I'll be careful. And then the next day, why did you let me eat that dessert? Like, I told you I didn't want to do that. You should have stopped me. Dude, no, it's not my responsibility, right? It's kind of a weird example, but it's that same idea of like you make a bad decision and then you get mad at me because I didn't stop you from making that bad decision. I'm not responsible for you. And so that again, okay, so let's go back to our topic, because just for the listening audience, we have a hard stop in about 12 minutes. So we're going to keep going, and then when we stop, we'll pick it up in our next episode. So the main thing, before we can even define an ultimatum and start distinguishing the difference, the biggest takeaway is, if you implement a boundary, then you have to accept and take full responsibility for the fact that you are setting it in place, knowing that you are the only person responsible for maintaining that boundary, right? If I want to be treated differently and I come to Michelle and I say, Michelle, I don't like the way my husband's talking to me and I want to do something about it. And then you're like, okay, so here's how you handle that. You're going to tell him, listen, from now on, if you raise your voice at me or if you insult me, I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk away and I'm not going to participate in that conversation. Okay, fine. Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to go implement that. So if I go and I tell my husband, that's what we're going to do, and then he starts talking shit to me and I just sit there and I start fighting and I start yelling, then I come back to you and say, I told him. I told him I didn't want him to talk to me that way. He didn't listen. See, it doesn't work. We can't implement this. And you're going to be like, the hell? Like, you didn't even try to implement what we talked about. You just thought that by trying to assert your control, that it was going to work out for you. And that's not how it's going to work. So first, if your perception of this is, I will tell the other person what I want and then they are responsible for giving it to me, then rewind and start this episode over.
I really like that example that you gave, actually. And I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more, because that's a common one that's set, right? So in this situation, the husband can't regulate his emotions yet, right? He's blowing up, he's name calling, he's yelling, whatever it is that he's doing. And it's kind of like expecting someone to know how to drive a car by handing them the manual one time. Here, read this once and then be a professional driver. Like, you cannot expect someone to change their behavior that quickly, right? Because I bet you, if you were to ask him when he's calm, do you like when you yell and name call and do all these things? He's going to probably be like, no. Do you feel in control when you do that? No. So it's not a conscious decision that they're making when they are at that place. So by you saying, hey, when you yell and name call, I'm going to leave, and you think that that's going to fix it. No, no, no. There needs to be a heightened level of awareness. That's where that partnership piece comes in, right?
Yes.
You're helping each other. So every time you leave, that's a point of reflection for them, right? Mm-hmm. For that partner. Be like, oh shit, I did it again. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's not a punishment. Absolutely.
No.
Yep.
It's not. And it's important to help them understand it's not a punishment, right? For your reason to tie back to nurturing the marriage, making it stronger, not make it sound like it's a threat. Like, hey, when you get angry, I'm out of here. Yeah. Then it kind of looks like you don't accept them for them. You don't accept all the emotions. It's not the anger that you're mad at, right? It's the behavior that they've chosen to express as a result of their anger. Anger is fine. Anger is a healthy emotion. It tells us what we're not okay with, right? And then it's up to us as individuals to figure out why it makes us angry so that we can do something about it, right? Yep. But if your partner's unaware and they're just blowing up, you telling them what you're not okay with is not going to be the end all fix all.
Yeah. Perfect. Yes. I'm so glad we dove into that. Good job. Because I do think that you're right. It's in a healthy relationship, you should be able to communicate your boundary and say, this is why, I'm working with a therapist, or I've recognized I contribute negatively to that situation where I do get pulled in. I do yell back at you. I do talk to you in a way that's not good, or I shut down, and I don't like that about myself. So I don't want to do that anymore. I want to have more control over my emotions. I want to take responsibility for how I participate. But I want to control me, not you. I need to control me. And part of that is recognizing when I'm coming up to that point where I'm about to engage in the negative behavior that I then regret or whatever, And that's when I want to pull back. So if I'm pulling back, it's because I feel it going in that direction. And I know that our pattern is to just completely spiral into an unhealthy communication. So that's what I want to do. What would you like to do? Because I don't like how I yell at you either. Like, this isn't all on you. What are you going to do? Because this is what I'm going to do. That would be the perfect scenario. Because then when I do that, and I maybe do have a keyword that says a Q word that's like lemons, and that's me saying, I notice that I'm not okay. I'm starting to get upset and I need to back away. So when you hear me say that, like, what do you want to do so that you don't get mad at me? Is that kind of what you were saying?
Absolutely. Boundaries and personal responsibility go hand in hand, right? Because you want to be proud of how you behave. And if you feel like someone crossing a boundary is going to lead you down that path of not being proud of how you behave and the kind of person you're showing yourself to be in those moments, then yeah, you sharing like, hey, I notice that when this happens, I end up doing this. I really don't like that version of myself. So in the future, when I start to notice myself get to that place, I'm actually going to bow out for a little bit and I'll rejoin you when things are calmer and we can talk about it. When I feel like I have the bandwidth and the capacity and the ability to actually see it through.
Yeah.
The more you make it about yourself and the less you make it about that person, the more receptive they're going to be. Because when you show that true vulnerability and personal responsibility of like, okay, I am responsible for myself, my emotions, how I act, they're not going to feel attacked. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, okay. Or sometimes they're like, yeah, you do need to work on that. And in those moments, just ignore that, okay? Just ignore that. And the beautiful thing is that in most marriages, the more personal responsibility one partner takes, it kind of like leaks into their behavior because then they'll start to reflect more. You don't even have to tell them to. You just sharing your own journey, they're going to notice and stop to think. Instead of defending themselves, they're going to have that capacity and space to be like, huh, you know, I kind of noticed that I do that too. And they might not even verbalize it to you. They might be doing it in secret.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
it does have a ripple effect.
Yep. And you have to know your partner, right? So if as you're trying to have these conversations with that person, you know that they tend to get defensive or whatever, then go in ready to not be triggered by their reaction to it. Like if they're like, yeah, well, you do need to work on it, like you said, then it's fine. I mean, you just you just have to be focused on why you're saying what you're saying. And again, that's part of the boundary. Like if I'm putting this in place, it's because I want to feel better. And so I'm just going to focus on how I handle it. If the other person doesn't get on board as quickly, or maybe they think I'm, ridiculous for even like, well, you've never been able to do this before. Why do you think you're going to be able to do it now? Don't worry about it. Because this isn't about them. Like you said, that other person is not necessarily trying to bring you down. I mean, some people are, but they're just trying to be themselves. And sometimes that just doesn't go very well. But also, I think that, and this is maybe sidebar, there are relationships where you don't have the other person, like their intention isn't to nurture the relationship. And that's where you kind of, when you implement this and you stick to it, and there's nothing they can throw at you, like you're not trying, you keep yelling at me, maintain yourself, keep control of yourself. If they get on board, this is beautiful. Be a leader, it's fine. If they don't, then you reevaluate with your professional, your therapist, your coach, whoever, like this isn't going well and I need more help. But we have to, kind of like with the parenting, if my goal is or if my decision is, I will not yell at my kids, and I go a week without yelling at them and then I yell at them, well, now you've reset. We have to start over, right? You don't just get to kind of be proud of yourself, like keep going. So it's the same with this. Like you don't get to say, I'm going to remove myself from this conversation because it's not good for me, and then get mad because they're not getting on board. Like it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, sorry. I wish it was different.
I know. All right, girl, we've got to wrap up. So let's do this. You and I will set part 2. And then in part 2, we're going to just to kind of give ourselves our task. We've kind of covered what boundaries are, how they work. So next session or episode, we're used to talking in sessions. We're going to talk about what is an ultimatum. And you and I actually are gonna like figure out what we think as like we're just gonna process our own thoughts because we don't
Yes.
even know. We don't know if there's a
It's
difference. It could be the same
unscripted.
thing. It is unscripted. It's very exciting. So we'll get that scheduled and then these episodes will be back to back. So thank you, friend. It was so nice to
Thank
see you and have you
you.
back on. I can't wait for part 2.
Me too.
All right,
Bye.
girl. Talk to you soon. Bye.